Today the world is silent about the tragedy of Chernobyl. Thousands of children are doomed to death. 3 million of the adult population are now sick from a multitude of illnesses as a consequence of the radiation and are foredoomed. When we say Russian occupiers away from Ukraine, they pour buckets of cold water on us. The Turks dominated in the Balkans for 6th century, but in the end the Balkan nations were freed from Turkish domination. Ukraine has been in slavery for 3 centuries, yet we believe that she will become independent. I have been a member of a nationalist organization for 30 years, and at the same time I worked for the underground Ukrainian Catholic Church and other Christian movements in Ukraine. I see that only Christians who are aware can obtain freedom for their enslaved land. Everyone who loves his native people cannot but be a nationalist. I believe in the health and resources of our people. Today we are witnessing a growing opposition to the Moscow occupation of the Ukrainian people and of other nations under Moscow's domination. The nationalists have never slackened in their opposition to the occupant. All the healthy national groups are organizing themselves around the gospel. Ukraine is a boiling volcano. The name of the leader of the National Liberation Movement, Stepan Bandera, is Albana. No one may blacken his name and our struggle. For who does this is a cruel enemy of our people. And it is I, the son of Ukrainian communists, who am saying this. Our Helsinki groups are working legally for the people, risking their lives constantly. All the nationalist organizations in Ukraine, the National Democrats, the Christian Democrats, and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists are a part of the Ukrainian National Front. It was this tradition of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists that formed the younger generation of Ukrainian nationalists and gave them a sense of direction in their unequal struggle. The Gorbachev administration continues to detain our brothers and sisters in the concentration camps and prisons, but these remain uncompromising before the Moscow occupants. Paulo Campo, a professor of physics and mathematics in the Uzhhorod State University, continues to be detained in the prison camps of Russia. He is now blind. Red Moscow condemns Ukrainians to many years of imprisonment. It carries its victims into Russian territory and detains them there in inhumane conditions. Practically speaking, every Ukrainian behind Moscow bars is a prisoner. The Ukrainian people turn in prayer to beseech mercy and help from God, holding the sword in one hand and with the other rebuilding their destroyed domestic nest. Our people have preserved the seal of their Christian faith and Christian virtues in this Red Sea of darkness and enslavement. Our people have preserved their family life amid an anti-Christian environment, Christian love, respect for their ancient traditions, and a devotion and loyalty to their mother church. We believe in God's victory. St. Peter wrote, "May God be praised in all things." In other words, who works without God and not for God is working for the Prince of Darkness. It is a duty incumbent upon every Christian to bring relief in physical distress to the suffering captive nations. Everyone is rightly dismayed at the action of the 2 travelers who passed by the wounded man on the road to Jericho. And likewise, we are all deeply touched by the compassion of the Samaritan for the unfortunate wretch. So likewise, the freedom of our Ukraine and its people is dependent in large part on the compassion and assistance of all the Christians of the world. There is today a new danger of the destruction of God's treasures in the spirits of many Christians. This is why we must all stand to defend the divine person of Christ, his teaching, and his holy sacraments. We must all be united to defend our right to life, our right to live, our Ukrainian national life. Ukraine and its people have entered the 2nd millennium of their Christian history. It was amid these worldwide celebrations that Ukrainians demonstrated their solidarity and unbroken will to rebuild their national life. These apostles are still in prison. Lovko Lukyanenko, Yuri Batyo, Stepan Belsky, Polyana Batyo. On December the 3rd of this year, Stepan Khmara, activist of the Ukrainian Catholic Church and the national movement, was arrested on the instructions of the Chief of Police, Lieutenant Colonel Polyakov. To be or not to be, and we say to be. to be and to defend Christ's truth and to live by it. The sacred mission of converting atheist Red Moscow to God is incumbent upon our people if peace and justice are to be established on earth. Christians cultivate a love for their native land and their people, for the love of one's people and land is commanded by the Christian command to love one's fellow man. No human coexistence is possible on earth without this. Christ himself has given us an example of this love. We cannot allow the world to plunge to its fatal end. Peace and quiet can be established on earth only with the fall of the Soviet Empire. We must remember this. The slogan, "They shall not pass," must become real for us. They must not pass, or otherwise the world that has grown on Christian tradition shall perish. Thank you.
Throughout the European continent, without unfortunately being able to give a specific slot to every country, we think it now right to move to the Baltic states. And we are fortunate enough to have with us today, I must try to pronounce the name right, Mr. Heikki Ahonen, who is an Estonian and an ex-prisoner of conscience expelled from his homeland. I will call him in a moment, but from the material supplied to me, I'm proud to see him as a young man here, because he is one of those generations who can expect, whether the process is slow or gradual or otherwise, I think we can safely say to him, as he is only just 32 years old, that I think long before these rallies will have run their course, he will be living in an independent country again, which is, after all, part of Estonia's recent history. I will only tell you, because we have got to keep within our time limits, that he has only recently come from Estonia. In 1983, he was arrested and actually imprisoned in Tallinn. He eventually was released without applying for pardon, presumably because the Soviets got tired of holding him. And so in 1988, this year, together with 15 other human rights activists, he signed a document proposing the formation of an Estonian National Independence Party. In February of this same year, he was rearrested, not unnaturally, I suppose, after doing that, on the eve of the rally planned to mark the anniversary of the Tartu Peace Treaty, which was signed on the 2nd of February 1920. That peace, an entirely false one as it turned out, that Russia then concluded between independent Estonia, as it was, and Soviet Russia, in which guarantees proved to be falsely given, that Soviet Russia would always respect the independence of Estonia. And we all know what happened as a result of the evil Molotov-Ribbentrop treaty at the beginning of the last war. Finally, in only March of this year, he was expelled from Estonia against his will. He was taken from prison to Moscow airport and put on a flight to Stockholm. We want you, Mr. Ahonen, to talk to us now. We want you to stay with us in this country in freedom as long as you need to. But also, we all wish circumstances arising when you will be able, as a young man, to go back to the country you love, and to which you belong, and to which we all wish you Godspeed, that you will be able to go back in independence. May I call on Mr. Heikki Ahonen now to address us.
Ladies and gentlemen, events of the past year make it clear that nearly 50 years of Soviet occupation have extinguished neither Baltic resistance nor Baltic hopes for restoration of independence. On the contrary, a new generation of Poles is at the forefront of demand camps resulting from engaging in anti-Soviet propaganda and agitation. Today's activists have a broad support among the Baltic peoples. The urgency of their demands is explained by my friend and fellow activist Ernst. With the number of Estonians living here steadily declining, there is only very little time left for us to try to return Estonia to what it was. There is a general feeling of alarm at the massive Russian immigration into the Baltic states, along with growing resentment of Moscow's control over every level of decision-making in these former parliamentary democracies. Estonians, Latvians and Lithuanians understand that their countries are being colonized, their natural resources plundered, their histories rewritten, their languages, cultures and religions actively eroded. Today we have got so far that the government of Soviet Estonia has declared the Estonian SSSR as a sovereign union republic as from 29 November 1988. Unfortunately, this declaration doesn't mean much. In a republic of 1.5 million inhabitants, where the threat of military occupation forces is 125,000 men, one cannot of course speak of independent politics. The freedom gained are in essence theoretical. The economic situation remains disastrous. At the same time, we can witness the extraordinary high level of political activity of Estonian people, which has so far been tolerated, although probably not approved by the central authorities. It is specifically economic reasons which have guided Gorbachev's army attempts to liberalize the Soviet system. These attempts have prompted a massive reaction in Baltic states, the growth of Estonians as well as Latvians and Lithuanians stand for the right to self-determination as before. It's economic reason which forced Gorbachev to tolerate mass demonstrations in the Baltic states, because he desperately needs Western technology and credits. At the same time, one could state that no outside aid could rescue the empire. It could only postpone its disintegration. The Soviet Union has fallen too deeply into an economic crisis for it to emerge from it as a victor. The present moment, while the most liberal of the leaders in Soviet history is in power, should be used to influence and direct the Soviet Union towards gradually restructuring itself, without risking a catastrophe for Europe and the whole world, which would inevitably occur if the Soviet Union disintegrated at the stroke.
Ladies and gentlemen, who is the President of the Polish government in exile, with his foreign minister advisor with him, and several other members of the Polish government in exile. And I'm grateful to you, sir, that you should have come to listen to one of your own colleagues who is fighting the cause we all have in common at the present time. I think it would be appropriate, before I actually ask, that flag was actually brought from Afghanistan and presented to this campaign by the freedom fighters of Mujahideen from Afghanistan, who turned up last night at my home and presented me with that banner to fly tonight. And I think that we should remember at this moment, opportunity may not come later, that in the person of Afghanistan, that tiny country, and the bravery of its people, they gave the free world actually almost a gasp of surprise, because they were the very first that proved that although the bear was mighty, he wasn't God Almighty himself. To come to the rostrum, and perhaps Lord Cheltenham would come up here at the same time, so that without any further delays, Mr. McGrath can introduce him after Mr. Czukowski has spoken.
Ladies and gentlemen, in September 1891, democratically elected representatives of the Polish nation gathered in Gdańsk expressed their support for the workers of Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, German Democratic Republic, Romania, Hungary, and for all the nations of the Soviet. I quote from the declaration: "Our aim is to fight for the improvement of the situation of all workers. We support those of you who have started to fight for the free trade union movement. We do believe that your and our representatives will soon be able to meet each other in order to share the experience of independent union." These words were accepted by 1,000 delegates of the Free Trade Union Solidarity by standing ovation. 7 years have passed since that remarkable event. Despite brutal repression, solidarity still alive. It has been recognized by the free democratic world. Let me mention the visit of the British Prime Minister, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, in Poland, and the meeting of Lech Wałęsa with the President of France, which is taking place in Paris. The experience of the Polish non-violent fight for freedom leads us to the conclusion that permanent change are brought about only by ourselves, namely trade union structures, independent, uncensored publishing, political parties, and other organizations outside communist control. Both our experience and all our history prove that regaining independence is possible with the cooperation of all the nations that were deprived of their sovereignty by the Soviet Union with practical approval by Western democracies. Ladies and gentlemen, during all the demonstrations and strikes since the imposition of martial law, the people kept saying, "There is no freedom without solidarity." Now we know that there is no solidarity without sovereignty. I don't mean only the sovereignty of Poland, but mean the sovereignty of all the nations in the Soviet sphere of influence. For some time now, we have been observing the process of the frosting of the last colonial empire. Just like 70 years ago, now the nation of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan demand that their rights be observed. Czechs and Slovaks, Hungarians and Romanians, and the nation of Yugoslavia express their desire to be free. Afghanistan fights for its independence with death. The most numerous Slavic nations, Russia, wants to be free as well. That's solidarity. The solidarity of nations in the Soviet sphere of influence is needed as never before. We need solidarity amongst all the enslaved nations. With over cooperation in the Eastern Europe and in exile, where our political elite can be found. Ladies and gentlemen, the cooperation among our nations is essential and it is possible. In order us to cooperate successfully, we have to forget territorial conflicts and mutual prejudices.
Yes.
Our experiments prove that such cooperation is possible. Let me point out the cooperation of both Czechs and Slovaks in exile and at home by the activity of the Polish-Czechoslovakian solidarity. The old Polish-Hungarian friendship has been strengthened, and the Polish dialogue with our Ukrainian brothers. We pay much attention to the cooperation between independent movements in Russia and Poland. Ladies and gentlemen, we look with hope and anticipation to the united Europe being built. That is the Europe we were separated from Central and East European nations. We are aware of our problems and limitations. That is why, having strong ties amongst our nations, threatened by Soviet imperialism, it is the only chance for us. Our aim is to form a really Central Europe that will be the bridge to united Europe and to our independence.
Hear, hear.
Whose voice is always to be heard on every platform in the upper house in order to keep alive the view that we all stand for in the solidarity of Eastern Europe. Lord Chalfont has had a very distinguished career, decorated for gallantry in the last war. He has served in high office in government, and now speaks regularly in the House of Lords, always in favour of individual freedom. He has come here to this great meeting this afternoon from a long way away, and we're delighted to see him, and we will listen to what he has to tell us with the greatest interest. Lord Chalfont.
Very much, Doris. May I say what a very great pleasure and honor it is to be here at this great valley, to see not only a number of old friends amongst freedom fighters here this evening, but a lot of new faces as well. I think this is an inspiring occasion. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak at it. I only apologize that I came some way through the proceedings. It may well, therefore, be that I shall say one or two things that have been said before. But I think there are certain things that need to be said over and over again. And I was fortunate enough to arrive before my old friend Vladimir Bukovsky had finished speaking, and he gave me pious statements being made about the end of the Cold War, ludicrous propositions about martial aid to the Soviet Union. And then finally, of course, the ludicrous overreaction of the press and indeed of some Western leaders to Mr. Gorbachev's speech at the United Nations in New York earlier this week. I think we really need to get these matters back into perspective. Freddie Bennett has told me that I must be brief, and I will try to be brief. It seems to me that what has happened is quite simple. Mr. Gorbachev has recognized as an astute and flexible politician that he needs to rejuvenate, to revive the disastrous economy of the Soviet Union. He needs to restore the self-confidence of the Soviet people. And in order to achieve this, he has first of all to give the Russian people a sense of openness and transparency, hence the policy of glasnost. He has to reconstruct a disastrously inefficient industrial and agricultural system, and this is the policy of perestroika. But perhaps most important of all, and this is the aspect of the matter on which I wish to concentrate as someone whose whole background has been in military and defense matters, most important, he has to devise a way of transferring resources from the vast military establishment of the Soviet Union into its civilian economy, into its industry and its agriculture. And of course, as many of us have been pointing out for years, the most effective way of doing this is to reduce conventional forces, because it is there that you make the saving more than in nuclear weapons. And Mr. Gorbachev recognized at once, fairly obvious fact, that if he had any hope of getting away with this in the Soviet Union, he had to persuade the West as well to engage in a radical program of arms control. If Mr. Gorbachev had tried to reduce defense expenditure, to reduce the size of the Soviet army, to cut the number of nuclear missiles, without some kind of corresponding disarmament on the part of the West, he would have disappeared from the political scene in 5 minutes. He knew that he had to do that, and it happened by, it may have been a coincidence of timing, it may have been something more clever than that. The diplomatic offensive of Gorbachev coincided with the last years of the Reagan presidency. And here was an American president looking for some great peacemaking achievement with which he could leave his office after the second term and ensure his place in history. And so we've seen what's happened. We have had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, which has begun at last a process of denuclearizing Europe, which we have been resisting, those of us who have been involved in arms control negotiations, we have been resisting in the West ever since the days of Adam Rapansky and his plan for a nuclear-free Europe. Now we've got it. And Europe is to that extent much more vulnerable to the Soviet military threat than it was before. The next thing we are to have, we are told, is a 50% cut in our strategic nuclear weapons. No one has yet thought that through. No one yet knows what that means, except that it quite clearly means that the strength and validity of the Western nuclear deterrent is going to be undermined and debilitated. And we even hear people now, people who I thought understood these matters to some extent, saying that we must move on from there to a nuclear-free world, when the only thing that has prevented the Soviet Union exercising its military option for the last 40 years has been the Western nuclear deterrent. It is very interesting that while we have been negotiating away our nuclear strength, until this week in New York, we've heard nothing about any wish or readiness on the part of the Soviet Union to reduce its massive conventional strength, its chemical warfare, offensive capability. We've seen no sign of any wish or readiness to change strategic doctrines, or tactical doctrines, or the kind of training which Soviet forces undergo. Anybody who follows these things with any degree of expertise or interest knows that every single Soviet military exercise, whether it is carried out by the group of Soviet forces in Germany, or whether it is carried out by the Soviet Baltic Fleet or the Soviet Pacific Fleet, they are always conducted on the basis of an offensive tactical doctrine. They are not there to defend the Soviet Union, they are there to attack the West. And we are gradually, unless we take a deep breath now and look at this again, we are gradually reducing our ability to prevent the Soviet Union, to dissuade the Soviet Union from using its military option when it recognizes that its political and economic options have failed. I'd just like to make one point about these unilateral forced reductions, which Mr. Gorbachev talked about and which was greeted with such euphoria, such uncritical admiration by the Western press and many Western leaders. Do we know exactly which forces are going to be withdrawn? No, we don't. He talks of withdrawing 6 divisions from Eastern Europe. From where? From the German Democratic Republic, or Czechoslovakia, or Poland. That makes a big difference, because we have to know where those forces come from before we know whether the withdrawal of 6 divisions will make any difference at all to the superiority of the Russian forces on the Central Front. 500,000 people, we understand, are to be demobilized. What people? Combatant troops, reserve troops, logistical troops. And even if they were all combatant troops, it represents something like 10% of the total military strength of the Soviet Union. And yet, as a result of all this, we have the Western press and Western leaders rolling over on their backs with delight that the Soviet Union is, it seems, heralding in an era of peace and cooperation. It really does make me wonder what our press and our public in this country have been taught to think. Furthermore, I don't have to remind this audience, because this is why we're here. Much of Europe the satellites of the Soviet Empire. Their culture and their history. And I'm delighted to see that George Urban is here this evening because he has written so powerfully on that subject. I mustn't detain you much longer, but I do want, before I sit down, to repeat, as many of my colleagues, including Freddie Bennett, have repeated before, so to speak, our side of this argument. You will hear them say, yes, but even so, having said all that, surely we must wish Mr. Gorbachev well in what he is trying to do inside the Soviet Union. Well, my friends, I'm not entirely sure that I do wish Mr. Gorbachev well in what he's trying to do. For more than 3 decades now, we have felt ourselves, and I think rightly, to be threatened by a Soviet Union which, although it was militarily powerful, has been economically feeble, demoralized, and oppressed. Now, if Mr. Gorbachev does succeed in making the Soviet Union economically sound and self-confident and self-reliant, but if he does not at the same time reduce the ability of the Soviet Union to use its military option, how can we possibly wish him well? If we have been impressed so long by a Soviet Union as it was and as it is, why should we not equally be afraid of a Soviet Union as it will be if Mr. Gorbachev succeeds? No one would be more anxious than I to see the people of the Soviet Union set free. But I have, I'm afraid, even more urgent priorities. I want to preserve the freedom and independence of my own country and its allies, and I want to see the once proud independent nations of Eastern Europe set free again. To me, that is a higher priority. There's much more I can say, but I will conclude with this thought. If Mr. Gorbachev does not succeed, then the possibility is, the very real possibility is, if he is replaced by those who now threaten him because of his perestroika and his glasnost, what we shall have is a return to a Soviet regime which will once again revert to its overt policies of threatening the West with every means at their command. And if that happens, at a time when we have been foolish enough to reduce our military forces unilaterally, to liquidate our nuclear deterrent, to reduce the size of our defences in Europe, then of course we shall have only ourselves to blame. I think therefore that it's important that we examine the realities behind the Gorbachev rhetoric. As I've said, let's, now that he's made this great initiative at the United Nations, let us ask him some questions about it. What type of forces are to be removed? From where? What are you going to do with the forces you've withdrawn from Afghanistan? Will the military equipment that you're going to get rid of be old, useless, or new and threatening? There are many, many questions that we've got to ask before we start hailing this as one of the great peace initiatives of the modern era. I'd like to conclude, if I may, with a little story. It concerns Henry Kissinger, our old friend Henry Kissinger, who when he was closing the proceedings of the disarmament and peace negotiations over Vietnam in Paris, was invited one evening to a party at the home of his French host, a very distinguished French diplomat. And the host, thinking to raise the intellectual level of the conversation slightly, which, as you know, French diplomats do tend to want to do, said, I wonder if we could have a little discussion about the impact of the French Revolution on the political development of the world. And he turned to Dr. Kissinger and he said, I wonder, Doctor, if you would like to open the discussion. Henry Kissinger, of course, to him this was meat and drink. He delivered a beautifully rounded lecturette about the development of American political democracy, with quotations from Tocqueville and Lafayette and other okay French names. Very distinguished old gentleman sitting next to Henry Kissinger, and he said, I wonder, Your Excellency, if you would now like to tell us a little about the impact of the French Revolution on the political development of your country. And the Chinese gentleman thought for a moment, and then he said, it is too early yet to say. That's what we should be saying to Mr. Gorbachev. It is much too early.
I drafted a declaration or resolution and had it typed, which I'm going to read to you, which a few of us are going to take round to the Russian embassy, Soviet Russian embassy, tomorrow morning. In fact, now, that would obviously be inappropriate, but I don't think we should part from here without there being something to which we have given approval, which will give us heart to go on in the future. And let this, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, not be the climax, but the beginning of a campaign which we will not rest until its aims are accomplished. If I can, therefore, and I must warn you in advance that there are no time now for amendments from the floor or elsewhere, you either have to agree to how I have summed up this meeting in advance or disagree. But I am afraid that there simply do not exist the facilities for altering the text at this stage, but I have done my best thinking what the speakers would say to sum up our feelings here today. And so I have written this, which will be typed, if you approve it, retyped and sent round by post directly to the Soviet embassy, but also to the Kremlin itself, and of course to the press. We gathered here together today, over 1,000 men and women. When I wrote this, I I put up to 1,000 men and women because I never dreamed of the success of our venture here today, and I was playing for safety. In fact, it is over 1,000 here today. Over 1,000 men and women, young and old, individuals and representatives of a dozen captive nations within the Soviet Union's European empire declare at an inaugural rally of the European Freedom Campaign that this is not the climax, but the start of a crusade supported already by scores of thousands, soon hundreds of thousands, and ultimately millions of people on both sides of the Iron Curtain. We will not rest until all, not just some of us living in Europe, can enjoy together the freedom set out in the Allies' Atlantic Charter of 1941. It may be that Mr. Gorbachev's promised reforms of Soviet society will bring some long overdue modest social and economic relief to the millions of Russians who have endured so much repression and deprivation under Marxist totalitarian rule since the Red Revolution of 1917. Be that as it may, these reforms have little or no relevance to the plight of the Soviet's captive nations and satellite states. Glasnost, a reluctant, grudging admission of hideous crimes against humanity committed against their inhabitants since their enforced incorporation at the end of World War II into the Soviet Empire, with no mention incidentally of any sign of repentance about any of these evil misdeeds, brings no comfort at all to the peoples of occupied Europe. They know what they have suffered, for they and their parents and grandparents are the victims of Soviet brutality. They are already well aware of what has happened to them and what is still happening to them. Perestroika, an assurance that the cruel Marxist social and economic system, which permeates, indeed dominates their lives, is going to be restructured to make the imperial power more powerful, until, and therefore better able to keep their empire intact and even later expanded, holds out no hope for them. They do not want to improve alien Marxist rule, but to get rid of it. Some of the so-called reforms of Soviet society which have a particular bearing on the destiny of those who unwillingly live behind the Iron Curtain indicate a greater degree of centralization of the power of the Kremlin even than hitherto, and removes the only clauses in the Soviet constitution that offer an opportunity to its socialist republics to leave the USSR. As for those of us living in the Free West, we should ourselves suspend judgment on Mr. Gorbachev's diktats until we see words matched with deeds, e.g. the removal of the obscenity of the Berlin Wall. Nor is there any evidence yet that there has been a change of heart in the Kremlin, but only a change of mind. It is notable that although the words of glasnost and perestroika are endlessly emergent from Mr. Gorbachev's lips, and are no less repetitively quoted in the world media, the one we never hear is the Russian word for freedom. In 1918, 70 years ago, Europe was more free, all too briefly, culturally, politically, and ethnically than at any other time. At the end of the last war, the Soviet-Russian Empire not only maintained, but vastly extended its iron grip in Europe to a degree never previously achieved in history. We believe now that a bright new dawn need not be too far away if we all stand together and keep faith one with another. We must do this as an overlong red sunset fades. Ladies and gentlemen, in the words of the original document that launched this campaign, we look forward confidently to the day when in the next century, throughout Europe, a child has to ask its father, Daddy, what was a gulag? Ladies and gentlemen, when I take that applause remark to me that without a formal vote, I take that as passing that resolution, declaration, by acclamation. Ladies and gentlemen, from me as your chairman, that is the formal end of the proceedings.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, just one thing before we depart, and that is a vote of thanks, I'm sure, to you for chairing this great gathering, and a vote of thanks also to the other 6 members of the Secretariat listed on your agenda, to thank also and Colin and Phyllis and all the others who have helped make a great success. They're over there by the bookstore, and I hope that you will look and see some marvellous publications which will help to reinforce your effectiveness in the battle for hearts and minds and to accelerate the day that we all pray for.
I think we might stand in front of this now. Bandmaster, could I now ask you to play the